Hi everyone, and welcome to Channel Fuzzy Theory. Today's video will be explaining the fundamentals of Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault is the most quoted author in the humanities, and for good reason. His thought provides various methods of finding insight into why people do what they do through the concepts of history, discourse, and power. Foucault attempts to explain the processes that shape the way we see the world in relation to the power structures that exist within history. For Foucault, power is not held by anyone. It is instead relational. Power is the kinds of possibilities we have in our relationships with other people. So, for example, children can express power via tantrums or hunger strikes. Workers can go on strike or shit-talk the boss on Twitter, or citizens can take to the street in protest. But how we can express power within relationships is dependent on history. Institutions like nation-states, political parties, hospitals, the law, traffic signals, and so on only exist because those before us all agreed, and we keep agreeing, relationally, that this is the way things should be. For Foucault, the ways we know, or even just our very subjectivity, is produced within relations of power. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault shows how every modern institution, like schools, hospitals, office buildings, courts, and so on, are all modeled on the prison to maximize surveillance and the disciplining of bodies. Whatever else K-12 primary and secondary education is, it is training us, literally disciplining our bodies, to be used to sitting all day in a building productively. That we all accept this conditioning is the working of power in history to shape us to believe that this is fine. Foucault's concept of discourse is where power and knowledge meet. What we know is not necessarily neutral or unbiased. What we know is dependent on how the relations of power shape what it is possible to speak about. For example, most of us take for granted that we have an unconscious or a subconscious. This is part of who we are, our very subjectivities. But this concept is only around a century and a half old. Before Freud, no one thought of themselves in these terms, and not as part of themselves. So, power, as relational, works through the new discourse of psychology to discipline modern people to have new subjectivities with an unconscious. Discourse, then, is how power works to produce knowledge, and how knowledge reinstates power. Discourse becomes, in Foucault's thought, the sum of all the ways we can think about something. To see how power relations work in institutions, think about how, in the late 19th century, but even today, doctors can have expert opinions in courts that can imprison people in mental institutions. Or how the state can take people's children away based on a set of criteria agreed on by whom, and based on what. So, power, knowledge, and discourse come together to produce institutions, ways of thinking and being, and even our very identities and subjectivities. Even those ways of thinking that have no basis in fact are operating on the same processes. Thus, one of the most important insights of Foucault in helping us understand these processes is the idea that truth is a product of discourse. The insight here by Foucault is that it doesn't matter if something is true or false factually. What matters is that people believe it and act on it. It doesn't matter whether an ideology is true or false. What matters is what people do if they think something is true. Many see this as nihilistic, but that is the opposite of Foucault's understanding. For Foucault, we are products of our time, and we are completely shaped by the institutions and culture around us. But once we know this, and once we see how we are shaped by discourses and power relations, that knowledge becomes the only source of real liberation. Unless we see how history and culture are producing us, how the discourses around us are shaping us, then we are just passive recipients of culture, power, and history. True freedom is the choice and agency that comes from understanding how we are shaped by the forces around us, and then deciding which ways we are going to let the world influence us. In fact, once we see how these processes work, we can produce new subjectivities that can give us new ways of acting within power relations and lead to more freedom. Foucault's theories explicitly provide understanding and strategies of action to help shift power relations to be less oppressive and move toward more equality and new ways of being. The final insight is that because power is relational, we as individuals also affect the world, even if it is in just a small way. So, while the world produces us, we also produce the world. And understanding this relationship can give us ways of making ourselves and the world better. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment.